The family reunion. Persons involved: Amy, Dowager Lady Monchensi, Ivy, Violet, and Agatha, her younger sisters. Colonel the Honorable Gerald Piper and the Hon Charles Piper, brothers of her deceased husband, Mary, daughter of a deceased cousin of Lady Monchensi, Denman, parlour maid, Harry Lord Monchensi, Amy's eldest son, Downing, his servant and chauffeur, Dr. Warburton, Sergeant Winchell, the Eumenides, and the scene is held in a country house in the north of England. Part 1. The drawing room after tea and afternoon in late March. Scene 1. Amy, Ivy, Violet, Agatha, Gerald, Charles, Mary. Denman enters to draw the curtains. Amy says, "Not yet. I will ring for you. It is still quite light. I have nothing to do but watch the days draw out, now that I sit in the house from October to June. And the swallow comes too soon, and the spring will be over. And the cuckoo will be gone before I'm out again. O sun that was once so warm, O light that was taken for granted, when I was young and strong, and sun and light unsought for, and the night unfeared, and the day expected, and the clocks could be trusted, tomorrow assured, and time would not stop in the dark. Put on the lights, but leave the curtains undrawn. Make up the fire. Will the spring never come? I am cold," Agatha says. "Wishwood was always a cold place, Amy," Ivy says. "I've always told Amy she should go south in the winter. Were I in Amy's position, I would go south in the winter. I would follow the sun, not wait for the sun to come here. I would not go south in the winter if I could afford it. Not freeze as I do in Bayswater by gas fire counting shillings." Violet says, "Go south to the English circling libraries, to the military widows and English chaplains, to the chilly decked chair, and the strong, cold tea, the strong, cold, stewed, bad Indian tea." Charles says, "That's not Amy's style at all. We are country-bred people. Amy has been too long used to our ways, living with horses and dogs and guns, ever to want to leave England in the winter. But a single man like me is better off in London. A man can be very cozy at his club, even in an English winter," Gerald says. "Well, as for me, I'd just as soon be a subaltern again, to be back in the East, an incomparable climate, for a man who can exercise a little common prudence, and your servants look after you very much better." Amy says, "My servants are perfectly competent, Gerald. I can still see to that." Violet says, "Well, as for me, I would never go south. No, definitely never. Even could I do it as well as Amy. England's bad enough. I would never go south, simply to see the vulgarest people. You can keep out of their way at home. People with money from heaven knows where." Gerald says, "Dividends from aeroplane shares." Violet says, "They bathe all day and they dance all night in the absolute minimum of clothes." Charles says, "It's the cocktail drinking does the harm. There's nothing on earth so bad for the young. All that a civilized person needs is a glass of dry sherry or two before dinner." A modern young people don't know what they're drinking. Modern young people don't care what they're eating. They've lost their sense of taste and smell because of their cocktails and cigarettes. What did Shakespeare say about, like, drinking and stuff? Well, I mean, it can be applied to stuff, right? That it excites the passion, but the passion's not as fulfilled as well. Denman enters with sherry and whiskey. Charles takes sherry and Gerald whiskey. That's what it comes to. And he lights a cigarette. Ivy says, the younger generation are undoubtedly decadent. Charles says, the younger generation are not what we were. Haven't the stamina. Haven't the sense of responsibility. You're being very hard on the younger generation. I don't come across them very much now myself. But I must say, I've met some very decent specimens and some first-class shots, better than you were, Charles, as I remember. Besides, you've got to make allowances. We haven't left them such an easy world to live in. Let the younger generation speak for itself. It's Mary's generation. What does she think about it? Mary says, really, Cousin Gerald, if you want information about the younger generation, you must ask someone else. I'm afraid I don't deserve the compliment. I don't belong to any generation. And exits. Violet, really, Gerald, I must say, you're very tactless. And I think that Charles might have been more considerate. Gerald says, I am very sorry. But why was she upset? I only meant to draw her into conversation. Charles says, she's a nice girl, but it is a difficult age for her. I suppose she must be getting on for 30. She ought to be married, and what is it? Amy says, so she should have been, if things had gone as I intended. Harry's return does not make things easy for her at the moment, but life may still go right. Meanwhile, let us drop the subject. The less sad said, the better, Gerald says. That reminds me, Amy. What are the boys all due? When are the boys all due to arrive? Amy says, I don't want the clock to stop in the dark. If you want to know why I never left Wishwood, that is the reason I keep Wishwood alive. To keep the family alive, to keep them together, to keep me alive. And I live to keep them. You, none of you understand how old you are, and death will come to you as a mild surprise, a momentary shudder in a vacant room. Only Agatha seems to discover some meaning in death, which I cannot find. I am only certain of Arthur and John. Arthur in London, John in Leicestershire. They should both be here in good time for dinner. Harry telephoned to me from Marseilles. He would come by air to Paris, and so to London, and hoped to arrive in the course of the evening. Harry was always the most likely to be late, says Violet. Amy says, this time it will not be his fault. We are very likely to have Harry at all, Ivy says. And when will you have your birthday cake, Amy, and open your presents? Amy says, after dinner. That is the best time. Ivy says, it is the first time. You have not had your cake and your presents at tea. Amy says, this is a very particular occasion. As you ought to know, it will be the first time for 8 years that we have all been together. Agatha says, it is going to be rather painful for Harry, after 8 years and all that has happened, to come back to Wishwood. Gerald says, why painful? Violet says, Gerald, you know what Agatha means. Agatha says, I mean painful because everything is irrevocable, because the past is irredeemable, because the future can only be built upon the real past. Wandering in the tropics, or against the painted scene of the Mediterranean, Harry must often have remembered Wishwood. The nursery tea, the school holiday, the daring feats on the old pony, and thought to creep back through the little door. He will find a new Wishwood. Adaptation is hard. Amy said. Nothing has changed, Agatha, at Witchwood. Everything is kept as it was when he left it, except the old pony and the mongrel setter, which I had to have destroyed. Nothing has been changed. I have seen to that. Agatha says, Yes, I mean that at Witchwood he will find another Harry. The man who returns will have to meet the boy who left, round by the stables, in the coach house, in the orchard, in the plantation, down the corridor that led to the nursery, round the corner of the new wing. He will have to face him, and it will not be a very jolly corner. When the Lupin time comes, and it does not come for everybody, the hidden is revealed, and the specters show themselves. Gerald says, I don't in the least know what you're talking about. You seem to be wanting to give us all the hump. I must say this isn't cheerful for Amy's birthday, or for Harold's homecoming. Make him feel at home, I say. Make him feel what has happened doesn't matter. He's taken his medicine, I've no doubt. Let him marry again and carry on at Witchwood. Amy says, Thank you, Gerald. Though Agatha means, as a rule, a good deal more than she cares to betray. I'm bound to say that I agree with you, Charles says. I never wrote to him when he lost his wife. That was just about a year ago, wasn't it? Do you think that I ought to mention it now? It seems to me too late, Amy says. Much too late. If he wants to talk about it, that's another matter. But I don't believe he will. He will wish to forget it. I do not mince matters in front of the family. You can call it nothing but a blessed relief, Violet says. I call it providential, Ivy says. Yet it must have been shocking, especially to lose anybody in that way. Swept off the deck in the middle of the storm, and never even to recover the body. Charles says, a well-known peeress vanishes from liner. Gerald says, yes, it's odd to think of her as permanently missing. Violet says, had she been drinking? Amy says, I would never ask him. Ivy says, these things are much better not inquired into. She may have done it in a fit of temper. I never met her. Gerald said. Amy says, I am very glad you did not. I am very glad that none of you ever met her. It will make the situation very much easier. And is why I was so anxious you should all be here. She should never have been one of the family. She never wished to be one of the family. She only wanted to keep him to herself, to satisfy her vanity. That's why she dragged him all over Europe and half round the world, to expensive hotels and her undesirable society, which she could choose herself. She never wanted Harry's relations, or Harry's old friends. She never wanted to fit herself to Harry, but only to bring Harry down to her own level, a restless, shivering, painted shadow. In life, she is less than a shadow in death. You might as well, all of you, know the truth. For the sake of the future, there can be no grief, and no regret, and no remorse. I would have prevented it if I could. For the sake of the future, Harry is to take command at Witchwood, and I hope we can contrive his future happiness. Do not discuss his absence. Please behave only as if nothing had happened in the last 8 years. Gerald says, that will be a little difficult. Violet says, nonsense, Gerald. You must see for yourself. It's the only thing to do. Sometimes you can be honest and actually just act like you care, act like, things weren't the case or whatever. Agatha says, thus, with most careful devotion, thus with precise attention to detail, interfering preparation of that which is already prepared, men tighten the knot of confusion into perfect misunderstanding, reflecting a pocket torch of observation upon each other's upsy, neglecting all the admonitions from the world around the corner. The winds talk in the dry hollow tree. and the inclination of the moon, the attraction of the dark passage, the paw under the door,